Well, it looked like Alyssa Thomas is hurt. Did Caitlin Clark get some justice from the gods from above? We don't know, but it looked very, very spooky with how she got hurt. I mean, she literally went down damn near in tears. Now, this is coming just on nearly 3 weeks after the attack that she put on Caitlin.
There's a moment in every scandal when the people in power realize they've made a catastrophic mistake. For the WNBA, that moment didn't arrive quietly in a boardroom or through a carefully worded press release. It arrived on live television, in high definition, in front of millions of people. And the fallout is now threatening to dismantle the entire league from the inside out. For months, something deeply uncomfortable has been building beneath the surface of women's professional basketball, a pattern so obvious, so relentless, and so thoroughly documented that ignoring it required active, deliberate effort from the people whose entire job is to protect the integrity of the sport. And tonight, that effort has completely collapsed. The wall the league built around its own negligence just cracked wide open, and what's pouring through isn't just controversy, it's legal exposure, corporate panic, and the kind of reputational damage that doesn't get cleaned up with a single press conference. This is the story of how one of the most financially valuable athletes in the history of women's sports became the target of a systematic campaign of physical intimidation, and how the organization that profited most from her presence did virtually nothing to stop it, until now, when stopping it is no longer optional. Every avalanche starts with a single crack. What happened during that game wasn't the first time Caitlin Clark had been on the receiving end of dangerous, non-basketball contact. It wasn't the second, or the fifth, or even the 10th. But something about this particular moment was different, and the sports world felt it instantly. Alyssa Thomas, a veteran player with a long history of physical, aggressive play, made a move during a chaotic scramble that had absolutely nothing to do with basketball. As Clark went down, Thomas drove her closed fist directly into Clark's throat. Not a basketball play, not an accidental collision in traffic, a closed fist to the throat of the league's most high-profile player in front of a packed arena and a national television audience. The immediate reaction in the building was the kind of stunned silence that only happens when something crosses a line people didn't even know existed. Players paused, coaches froze, the crowd waited for the inevitable whistle that would acknowledge what every single person in that building had just witnessed. It never came. The referee crew, professionals who are paid specifically to protect player safety and enforce the rulebook in real time, did absolutely nothing. No foul, no stoppage, no acknowledgement that a closed fist had just connected with another player's throat on national television. The game continued as though nothing had happened, and in that moment of institutional silence, something snapped. Not just for fans watching at home, not just for Clark's coaching staff, something snapped inside the corporate infrastructure of the WNBA itself. Because the people writing the checks suddenly understood that the league had just handed its critics the most undeniable piece of evidence they'd ever been given. The referee crew didn't just miss a foul call that night, they handed a team of corporate lawyers a loaded weapon. To understand why this specific incident triggered a crisis at the executive level, you have to understand exactly what Caitlin Clark means to the WNBA as a financial entity, because the numbers are not subtle. From the moment Clark entered the league, the economic impact was immediate, staggering, and unprecedented. Merchandise sales didn't tick upward, they surged over 600%. League app engagement jumped by the same margin. Subscriptions to the WNBA League Pass exploded by over 400%. The Indiana Fever, a franchise that had spent years operating in relative obscurity, tripled in market value. Television ratings for games featuring Clark broke records that had stood for years, and corporate sponsors who had previously shown minimal interest in women's basketball were suddenly lining up to attach their names to a product that finally had a global audience tuning in every single night. In the business world, when a single individual generates that kind of economic transformation for an organization, that individual is protected at all costs. You build systems around them. You ensure their safety. You make absolutely certain that the conditions of their employment are secure, stable, and legally defensible. Because losing that person, or allowing them to be compromised, means losing everything they brought with them. The WNBA did the opposite. Week after week, game after game, Clark absorbed physical contact that went far beyond the boundaries of competitive basketball. Hard fouls became dangerous takedowns, aggressive defense became targeting, and the officiating crew, game after game, applied a standard to Clark that they applied to nobody else on the floor. Coaches noticed, analysts noticed, the players noticed, and most importantly, the fans noticed, in numbers large enough to create a social media pressure campaign that corporate sponsors could not comfortably ignore. The league's front office watched all of it happen and made the calculated decision to look away. That decision, which probably felt manageable at the time, has now transformed into the single most expensive mistake in the organization's history. When Fever head coach Stephanie White walked into that post-game press conference, the people expecting a measured, carefully worded response to a frustrating loss got something entirely different. What they got was a coach operating completely beyond the boundary of institutional politeness. And what she said in front of those cameras is now part of the official record. White didn't hedge. She didn't use diplomatic language. She didn't offer the kind of vague, both sides framing that coaches typically deploy when they want to criticize officiating without drawing a fine. She looked directly into the cameras, visibly shaking with a level of controlled rage that was uncomfortable to watch, and she called the entire situation exactly what it was: dangerous, unacceptable, and deeply disrespectful to everything the sport is supposed to represent. She specifically called out the pattern, not just the incident, the pattern, the repeated failure to protect her player, the consistency with which Clark absorbed contact that would have drawn immediate whistles for anyone else on the floor, the institutional indifference that had forced her coaching staff to watch game after game as their most valuable player absorbed punishment that the league's own rulebook explicitly prohibits. That press conference moment matters beyond its emotional content because it created something the league's legal team genuinely fears: a documented, time-stamped, public record of a head coach formally stating that her players' physical safety was being systemically compromised. That's not just a news cycle, that's potential evidence. The digital response to that press conference was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the clip had been viewed millions of times. Fan communities that had been expressing frustration for months finally had a moment crystalline enough to demand real accountability. And the corporate sponsors, the companies whose logos appear on jerseys, on scoreboards, and in every broadcast, began making phone calls that the league's front office could not afford to ignore. 24 hours later, the WNBA did something it almost never does. It reversed course, publicly, retroactively upgrading the play to a flagrant foul 2 and announcing a mandatory one-game suspension for Thomas. The league framed this as the system working correctly. What it actually was a panicked retreat under pressure, and the chaotic, reluctant nature of that reversal revealed something far more damaging than the original incident. It confirmed that the league knew what it was looking at from the beginning, chose nothing, and only acted when the public pressure became commercially unsustainable. That confirmation is exactly what the lawyers needed. Here is the part of this story that transforms it from a sports controversy into something with genuinely historic consequences.
A powerhouse multi-million-dollar sports law firm has officially entered this situation, and they are not here to negotiate. They have reviewed the high-definition game film. They have compiled a comprehensive, meticulously documented timeline of the league's referee decisions involving Clark across the entire season. They have cross-referenced those decisions against the WNBA's own published rulebook, its stated player protection protocols, and the federal legal standards that govern workplace safety for professional employees. And their conclusion is not a suggestion, it's a formal legal argument.
The WNBA's systematic failure to enforce its own rulebook and provide a secure, standardized working environment for one of its employees constitutes a direct, actionable violation of that employee's civil and professional rights. They are referencing Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the federal law that prohibits the creation of hostile work environments for employees, and they are arguing on the record that what Clark has experienced across this season meets the legal threshold for exactly that. Think about what that framing means. This is no longer a conversation about whether a referee made a bad call in a basketball game. This is a formal legal argument that a major professional sports league created and maintained a hostile work environment for a specific employee, allowed that environment to persist despite documented evidence, and then attempted to minimize and obscure that evidence when it became publicly inconvenient. That's the kind of legal argument that doesn't get quietly settled with a donation to a charity and a handshake. That's the kind of argument that goes to federal court, and if it does, everything changes. If this legal action moves into formal federal litigation, the WNBA faces something far more terrifying than a fine or a forced policy change. They face discovery. For anyone unfamiliar with how federal civil litigation works, discovery is the legal process through which both sides in a lawsuit are required to hand over all relevant internal documentation to the court. Every email, every text message, every internal memo, every private communication between executive leadership, referee coordinators, and league officials that touches on the subject of how physical play involving Caitlin Clark was evaluated, discussed, and ultimately handled. That means the league would potentially be legally required to produce internal executive communications discussing the targeting of Clark. It means referee evaluation sheets, the internal documents used to grade officials on their performance, would become part of the public record. It means any private communication in which league leadership acknowledged the problem and chose not to address it would be handed to the opposing legal team and potentially read aloud in open court. The financial consequences of that kind of exposure are almost impossible to overstate. The WNBA's current television distribution contracts are built on a foundation of credibility and institutional integrity. Corporate sponsors, the major brands that have invested heavily in the league specifically because of the Clark-driven audience surge, made those investments based on a public-facing image of a professional, well-governed sports organization. A federal discovery process that reveals internal documentation of deliberate negligence, or worse, deliberate targeting, would make those contracts legally and commercially untenable overnight. Sources close to the situation have confirmed that the commissioner's office is currently operating in continuous emergency mode. Legal counsel has delivered a frank assessment. The league is standing on ground that is almost entirely indefensible. Every day that passes without a fundamental overhaul of the officiating system and the player protection protocols is another day that the legal exposure compounds. And the lawyers on the other side of this fight are not the kind of attorneys who back down when a league office sends a strongly worded letter. While the corporate war was building in boardrooms and law offices, something almost poetic was happening on the court, and it arrived with the kind of timing that makes you question whether the universe has a sense of irony. Alyssa Thomas, the veteran who walked onto that floor with the intention of sending a physical message to a younger player, began experiencing the full weight of consequences from multiple directions simultaneously. And the way those consequences arrived, layered on top of each other in rapid succession, created a storyline that not even the most creative sports writer could have manufactured. First came the suspension itself, a public, humiliating acknowledgement that what she did was outside the boundaries of acceptable professional conduct. The one-game suspension stripped her of her game check and attached her name permanently to one of the most scrutinized incidents in recent WNBA history. For a veteran player who built her reputation on being a tough, physical presence that younger players respected, that public labeling carries a cost that no fine schedule can fully capture.
Then came the revelation about her technical foul accumulation. Thomas had quietly racked up 4 technical fouls across the season, a number that triggers automatic escalating penalties under the WNBA's own disciplinary structure. The first 3 technicals each carry a $500 fine. The 4th through 7th escalate to $1,000 each and come with a formal warning letter issued directly from league headquarters. Every technical foul beyond that carries a $1,500 fine and a mandatory additional game suspension. Thomas had hit the threshold at the worst possible moment, with the entire sports world paying closer attention to her conduct than at any previous point in her career. And then came the physical reckoning. Reports emerging from people close to the situation indicated that Thomas left the facility dealing with significant physical repercussions from her own over-aggressive play, the kind of ironic physical consequence that happens when a player operates so far outside the boundaries of controlled, basketball-focused movement that their own body absorbs the damage. The aggression she brought onto the floor to intimidate and suppress Clark didn't just fail to achieve its goal, it backfired on her in the most literal physical sense possible. Her team's momentum took a direct hit at a critical point in the season. Her personal marketability, already complicated by the public nature of the incident, took damage that will take considerable time to repair. And her standing in a league that is now under an intense microscope regarding exactly this type of physical conduct has fundamentally shifted. She stepped onto that floor as a veteran enforcer with years of impunity behind her. She stepped off it as the central figure in the most legally and commercially consequential controversy the WNBA has faced in years. The hunter became the hunted, and it happened fast. What's happening right now inside the WNBA's executive structure is not a standard crisis management situation. This isn't a PR firm drafting a careful statement and waiting for the news cycle to move on. This is an organization that has arrived at a genuine fork in the road, and both paths carry consequences severe enough to permanently alter the league's future. Option 1. The commissioner implements an immediate, sweeping overhaul of the officiating system. Permanent bans for non-basketball physical violence become the new standard. The referee evaluation process gets overhauled with external accountability mechanisms. A formal, documented player protection protocol gets established and publicly committed to in writing, the kind of written commitment that creates legal obligation rather than just good optics. This path is painful, expensive, and requires the league to publicly admit that what happened was not an isolated incident, but a systemic failure. It means accountability for the people who allowed this to persist. It means the kind of institutional reform that disrupts power structures that have been in place for years. Option 2. The league continues its current approach of reactive, minimal response, suspensions issued under pressure, fines applied after the fact, public statements that acknowledge the incident without acknowledging the pattern. This path feels more comfortable in the short term. It doesn't require admitting institutional failure. It doesn't disrupt existing power structures. But this path leads directly into federal court, with a discovery process that could expose years of internal documentation the league has every reason to keep private. There is no third option. The days of this situation existing in a gray zone where the league could manage the narrative through careful messaging are over.
The legal teams are already working, the documentation has already been compiled, the formal arguments have already been made on the record. The only remaining question is whether the WNBA's leadership recognizes what hour it actually is and responds accordingly. Caitlin Clark received a measure of justice when that suspension came down, a small one, delayed and reluctant, but real. What she has not received is any guarantee that the system that allowed all of this to happen has been genuinely fixed. The coaches know it, the players know it, the lawyers absolutely know it, and the tens of millions of fans who watch that fist connect with her throat on national television and then watch the referees do nothing, they know it too.
The global sports community is now watching every single whistle in every single WNBA game with a level of scrutiny this league has never experienced before. Every missed call gets documented, every inconsistency gets cataloged, every instance of the pattern continuing gets added to a growing record that the legal team on the other side of this fight will be very happy to receive. The WNBA built something genuinely historic when Caitlin Clark walked through its doors. The viewership, the revenue, the cultural conversation, the generational opportunity to establish women's professional basketball as a permanent fixture of mainstream American sports, all of it arrived because of what she brought to the product. The question that will define this league's legacy isn't whether it can survive a lawsuit. The question is whether the people running it are willing to protect what they built, or whether they're going to let institutional arrogance and the politics of internal resentment burn it to the ground. The clock is running, the lawyers are ready, and the next move belongs entirely to the people sitting in those emergency meetings, staring at legal briefs, and realizing that the decision they make in the next few weeks will echo through the history of this sport for decades. Whatever happens next, it will not be quiet.